In the last lesson, we built a simple two-column layout, but we still need to make a couple of layout tweaks. So in this lesson, we'll make those layout tweaks, giving me the perfect opportunity to introduce you to the power of Flexbox. Sure, the small layout tweaks that we need to make here are very easy. They're pretty much just 2 clicks. But I'm going to take a little time in this lesson to break down what is actually going on. The more comfortable you are with how Flex works, the more control that you will have over any layout problems you need to solve in future. First, what is Flexbox? Well, Flexbox is a layout module that is just a part of regular CSS actually. It's been around a few years now. Flexbox is all about aligning things horizontally and vertically on the page. Yes, Flex allows us to create column layouts like we did in the last lesson with our 2 columns, aligning the 2 columns side by side. Flexbox handled that behind the scenes, and you'll learn shortly how to do that yourself manually. But Flex isn't just about creating column grids. It also allows you to align individual content elements within a column as well. An example of that is in a typical site header. You might want to space your logo and your nav menu all the way to the left and right, or align them in all sorts of other ways. Flexbox makes this kind of alignment of content elements really easy with one click, without having to deal with columns or grids at all. However, there is also another newer layout module in CSS called CSS Grid. CSS Grid, as the name suggests, is for creating column layout grids. And it does have some extra features that make designing column grids easier and even more powerful than Flexbox. Both are great though. It's not like you have to choose between one or the other. CSS Grid doesn't replace Flex. They're just different. And soon, Bricks will be introducing support for CSS Grid as well, and I'll record some extra lessons on it as soon as Bricks has it. Anyway, let's now go and fix those couple of little layout issues. A reminder, we need a gap between these columns, and I'd also like to center the columns vertically inside the container. For both of these, I'll first just very quickly show you what you need to click, but then we'll go deeper into what's actually happening. We want a gap between these 2 columns. So with Flex, you make the required setting on the parent of the elements you want to affect. In this case, we want to affect the 2 columns, put in a gap between them. So we need to select the parent of the 2 columns, which in this case is the container element. So I'll select that, then over to the container's settings panel in the content tab. Here's column gap, and I'll set that to 2.5 rem, which is 40 pixels. See, there's a nice gap between the columns now. And we also want the columns to be centered vertically inside the container. And for that, we need this option, center on the cross axis. I'll explain what cross axis means shortly, don't worry. But that's it. Now, the vertically centered columns aren't so obvious here because I have my screen zoomed in a lot when I make these videos. Let me just quickly preview this so you can see more clearly. There you go. Well, that's quickly what you need to click anyway. Column gap and center on the cross axis. Let's now rewind a bit and take a deeper look at what's actually happening. First, here's the general rule with Flex that you've already seen. You set Flex rules on a parent element which affects its direct children. In plain English, that simply means to set Flex styling that affects these 2 columns, you don't make the settings on the columns, you set them on the parent of the columns in the structure. See? Their parent element, in this case, happens to be a container. It doesn't have to be a container. It could be anything. It is whatever the parent happens to be. And by the way, this is important. The Flex styles only affect the direct children. So in this case, Flex styles that we set on the container affect the columns only. They don't affect anything any levels deeper, like the content inside the columns. It's just the direct children on the very next level down from the parent. Make sense? You'll be seeing this over and over again, so you will get plenty of practice. Don't worry. And now with the parent element selected, let's go and have a closer look at those Flex settings. The column gap is, of course, the gap between the columns. Now I chose 2.5 rem because the default left and right padding on our container is also 2.5 rem. We set that in the last module. So our spacing is going to be nice and consistent. We'll see row gap in action later. Now, about aligning the columns vertically inside the container. Remember earlier I said Flex is all about aligning things horizontally or vertically? Well, Flex always starts with a direction. And the direction of these two columns was actually set to horizontal row by bricks when we added this layout. And horizontal row means it places the columns side by side, horizontally. If we wanted the direction to be vertical, see, that's now placed the columns on top of each other vertically, and that does not look good on desktop, so I'll put it back. Then we have three sets of alignment controls here: align the container itself, align the columns on the main axis, and align the columns on the cross axis. I'm going to skip the first one, which aligns the selected container itself inside another Flex parent. Let's ignore this one. You'll much more often use the next two. So main axis first. What does main axis mean? Well, here's the rule. It's quite simple actually. If you have the direction set to horizontal, like we do right now, then the main axis is also horizontal, left to right. See how these lines in each of the icons in turn go from left to right horizontally? And the little blocks inside, which you can think of as our columns, they are aligned horizontally with them as well. And cross axis is the opposite, vertical, top to bottom. Again, see how the lines here in the icons go from top to bottom? And we wanted to align the columns vertically inside the container, so that's why I chose this one. The icon shows the content in the middle, not aligned to the top or the bottom like these two. And note that if I change the direction up here to vertical instead, then the axes swap roles. So now the main axis is also vertical to match the direction, and the cross axis is now the opposite, horizontal. I'll pop the direction back to horizontal. And that's the basics of how Flex works. Now, while you're here, let's just take a quick look at some of the other options there are for alignment. Like on the horizontal axis, side to side, you can place all the child elements over to the left of the parent that you're editing, or over to the right, or space them out from each other in different ways. And on the vertical axis, you can place all the child elements at the top of the parent you're currently editing, or the middle, like we did, or the bottom, or even stretch them, which can come in handy later when making equal height columns. Don't worry if you play with some of these flex alignment options and they don't seem to have any effect. These columns are taking up 100% of the width of the container in total, so in this case, there's actually no room to see the columns aligning with space between or a few of the other options. That's okay, we'll be using many of the other alignment options throughout the course. I'm just introducing you to the general idea here. Okay, your job now is to select your container element, then set the column gap to 2.5 rem and the cross-axis alignment to center. And next, we'll make this look great on all side screens by editing our layout for responsive. See you there soon.